You know how some leaders can make you feel so special and like you are the only person in the room and others just miss that mark? Oftentimes, the key behind that is empathy. Empathy is the glue and the rocket fuel that is taking an organization from good to great. And it is a skill set that we all need to develop. That is what we're talking about today. And we have an expert in empathy and emotional intelligence talking with us about what we need to look for, how it's going to bring us clarity, and how scientifically and statistically it is proven to drive innovation, productivity, and results. You're going to want to take notes for this one because it is jam packed with tips, tools, and strategies to help you get to that next level. I'm Clara Capano, and this is Clarity in Action. Welcome to Clarity in Action. This is the show where we have real conversations that are going to challenge your perspectives and drive real action. So if you are tired of holding back and you're ready to make bold moves, this is the show for you. Join us as we are going to take you from confusion into clarity. Hi, and welcome back to Clarity in Action. Well, we have a special treat, and this episode is fire because we are talking about one of the most important skill sets. You're going to want to have a notepad ready because I'm telling you right now, this one's going to be off the hook. We are talking about empathy and leading with empathy, emotional intelligence, because this is the number one skill set to have for modern leadership today. And to help with this conversation, I have a wonderful guest. She is becoming a new friend of mine. And this is Dr. Doctor, you got that? Doctor, she knows what she's talking about. Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller. So Dr. Melissa, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Clara. I'm so excited to be here and so excited to talk to your audience. And this is exactly where I want to be to keep going with this conversation. So,
yeah. This is your jam. And again, I know you've done a TED Talk. You've done so much on this. And before we dive into the nuts and bolts about what empathy is, why it's so important, and why we need to pay attention to it, I would love to just hear, what was your moment of clarity where you're like, empathy is key?
Yeah. So it actually goes back to like my other life, because I was a performing musician. I was a French hornist for a long time, and I had my doctorate in it. I actually moved out west to become a professor. And, this is something you spend your life doing, and it's all I ever wanted to do. But within my very first term in this place, I was assaulted by one of my colleagues. And that was bad enough. But the thing that really brought me around to what happens when an organization lacks empathy was when I went to, our boss and was told that as a junior female faculty member, if I'm stirring up trouble, I'm never going to get tenure. I'm never going to get promoted. Mm-hmm. When I went to his boss, I was told if I didn't like it, I should just leave. And I talked to everybody in the university that I could think of, even without, outside of the university, everybody. And everybody was just kind of like, it's not my problem. Gee, we're sorry, but, And I eventually had to leave. Spoiler alert, I didn't get tenure. I didn't get promoted. And my career was really destroyed in the process. So it took me about 7 years of spinning to try and put my finger on what I thought the problem was. And eventually I came to this idea that there wasn't a human to human connection. There wasn't understanding, which is what empathy is. Mm-hmm. And that so many other systems and organizations that I've been in since then also lack empathy. And I started to ask why.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this to ourselves? Why are we doing this to people? And we see it everywhere. So my big moment of clarity was in figuring out that I think this is the problem. And that if I can keep one person from feeling the way I felt, alone and ostracized and, pushed out, that this was going to be what I wanted to do.
So good. So good. And, when you find that moment, it's, it feels so good to do that and being able to go out there and then, really speak to others and be able to help others. But let's break it down a little bit. What even is empathy? And especially like when we're looking at it, not just from the human element, but what does it mean to have empathy as a leader and in the workplace?
Totally. Because empathy is one of those words that it's really popular right now. Everybody's throwing it out there. But I
Exactly.
mean, if you ask someone to define it, they're like, I don't
Whoa, I just know
know.
I'm supposed to have it.
Yeah,
Whoa.
it's feelings, right? Well, yes and no. So empathy at its heart is understanding and connection. There's an article talking about how there's actually 43 different kinds of empathy
Oh
that
my.
fall into 8 broad categories. So this feeling part,
Mhm.
that's one, but it's not the only one. So when we're talking in terms of leadership and understanding and connecting with people, it isn't necessarily a feeling thing because we all know feelings can be pretty fluffy. They're not very clear sometimes. And, in leadership, it's necessary to be able to lead clearly. And there are other kinds that actually foster understanding and connection that maybe have nothing to do with feelings at all.
True. I love it. So you brought up this idea of, being able to see clearly. So again, my favorite word is clarity, obviously. So go a little bit deeper into this. How does empathy connect with clarity?
So the thing with empathy is it actually allows you to understand and connect with people, which means that you're not fumbling around and hoping that you're close, which it's really hard to find clarity when that happens. One of the things that I talk about a lot is the difference between empathy and compassion, because we tend to lump them together in like this big ball with sympathy, and they're not. They're very different things. So empathy is how you feel, but there's no actual action. Compassion is the action that goes with that. Well, if you're showing compassion for somebody without empathy first and being clear on what this compassionate action is going to be, you can really mess this up. And I say this tongue in cheek, but we talk about the pizza party, right? Oh, I want to show my employees that they're great, and I'm going to do this compassionate action of having a pizza party. Well, did you connect with them first?
Mhm.
Because if 2 of your employees are gluten free, if one of them is your assistant and it's actually going to put more work on them to do it, if 2 of them don't really want to be in the same room with each other and they take that time to call their families and do other things, then that's not actually a compassionate action. And because you didn't connect with empathy to understand first, you
Mhm.
weren't clear on what compassion looks like for them, it could end up being taken really the wrong way.
Yeah. So true. So I want to talk a little bit about, again, using empathy, because I think there's a lot of myths out there and a lot of confusion around it. I think on some level, I was born with a certain level of compassion and empathy. I like to think anyway.
Yeah.
Growing up, and I'm going to date myself, growing up in the 80s, I feel like empathy was quashed, especially when it came to leadership. I was told I was too sensitive. I watched televisions like LA Law and Dallas and Dynasty, and it was all about, killing it in the boardroom. And, the evil people, those were always the ones, it was cutthroat.
Yeah.
So I think when I started my path of leadership, I brought that mentality with me. And I'm just going to say it didn't work because I was very task oriented. I was very transactional. I was not relational, and I wasn't having connection, and therefore wasn't really getting the results that I wanted. And I also knew it wasn't right, but I didn't know what to do. And I'd like to talk about and get your thoughts on, this paradigm and this dynamic between being soft and being empathetic, because I think sometimes people lump them together when they're very, very different.
Yes, hugely different. So first of all, what I'm hearing, and I mean, I grew up in the 80s too, so I saw it too. You're talking about a command and control style of leadership. And
Mhm.
that was the way things were for a long time. I would say it wasn't until, well, the very first article on emotional intelligence was published in 1990 by 2 guys named Salovey and Mayer. So really, we didn't bring this into the vernacular until then. And Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence and How It Can Be More Important Than IQ, was 1995. So I think we were all a little late to the party in figuring some of this out. And part of it is this idea that empathy is soft, but it's not. I mean, just because you have empathy and you're showing connection and understanding does not mean you don't have boundaries, does not mean you can't be clear. I mean, there's a way to do it and a way not to do it, but it's not touchy feely. It's not coddling. It really is just creating connection and understanding. Business has got to get done. period. And when you go into it too soft, it can actually hinder business getting done. So you can go too far that way, just like you can go too far the other way with no empathy. I mean, even at its base, when you think about understanding and connection, you really ought to be understanding and connecting with your customers. I mean, there's empathy mapping,
Right.
that's something which businesses do all the time. So why not take those same skills to apply to employees, to apply to other stakeholders, to apply to the boardroom? It really is that human to human connection that we take the time to understand and connect. And that doesn't mean we need to spend a lot of time, and it does not have to be soft.
Yeah.
Because sometimes clarity, like you talk about, is kindness. And clarity isn't necessarily soft, but it is with the best intentions and with having the other person in mind and creating that understanding and connection, even if it's something hard.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I want to continue this a little bit deeper and get some maybe practical applications, because at the end of the day, results have to happen.
Yes.
And we have to hold our people accountable. And I know for me, I'd be like, I want to be supportive. And at the same time, the work needs to get done. So how can a leader, tie those two together and do the dance between having empathy and also holding their people accountable?
Yeah, absolutely. So the cool thing about empathy, so originally it was kind of lumped together in the emotional intelligence bucket, you know, along with communication, along with motivation, along with all these other things. Well, I think empathy has to come first. You have to actually plug it in so when you go into that big toolbox of emotional intelligence tools, whether you're getting a hammer or a left-handed screwdriver, and it makes a difference. So by first connecting with your emotional intelligence through empathy, by understanding what people need, you know how to motivate your employees, you know how to make things move forward, and you understand, because you are connected, that there are some employees that maybe the best thing you can do for them is to help them understand this doesn't work like this.
Yeah.
I want to help you as far as I can, but you have got to help yourself. Clarity is kindness, Brene Brown.
Yep.
We all come to where we're at different times in different places, and we all learn in different ways. And sometimes that wake up call is the kindest thing you can do, because you're helping somebody with their future and not just with what's happening today.
I like that. I like the idea of, again, understanding that it's coming from a place of kindness, it's coming from a place of love, and bringing that together, and realizing that, again, it's looking at today and building that foundation. Because I think when we have to have those crucial conversations, it's, I don't want to say take the personal out of it, but it's, again, coming from a place of that kindness. And that way it's not a blaming thing. It's not an, oh, you did this or you're not doing this. It's, let's talk about how this is going to benefit. Let's talk about, the human side of it to get that buy-in. And that's how we can wrap it in the pretty bow of empathy around it.
Yeah. And I think you actually bring up a good point, because empathy and judgment cannot exist in the same space, period. End of discussion. So if you're coming at it from a place of blame, if you're coming at it from a place of pity, if you're coming at it from any kind of judgment, it's not empathy. And that's a huge cue that this is not empathy. So it really is with wanting to help people do better, which is why I actually try to take the feeling out of it. Because as a leader, if you're barraged with those kind of feelings all day, every day, you're heading for burnout. So you really do need to employ cognitive empathy and logically understanding what's going on, and mentally being able to make these connections without taking on all these feelings, because you are going to have to make some hard decisions. That's just part of the job.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I do when I'm speaking and conducting my workshops is, helping leaders to build those healthy cultures. And part of having a healthy culture is having an empathetic culture. And I will say, I ask people all the time, and their answer is, oh, yes, I'm empathetic. And I, have this culture that opens feedback and all these things. And yeah, it ain't true. As a high performer, I love to start my day with two critical things. One, time with my dog, and two, coffee. And not just good coffee, but great coffee. I am proud to have Fetch Coffee Roasters as a sponsor for Clarity in Action, not only because they have great coffee with fun names such as Muddy Paws and Squirrel, but also for every bag of coffee that they sell, they donate $1 to helping dogs in need. I mean, how much better could it get than that? In fact, they've raised over $25,000 in their local communities. So go over to fetchroasters.com and grab your coffee and share some love with some dogs in your community too. So, if somebody kind of wants to do their own sort of analysis, self awareness, what are some key signs that maybe empathy is lacking a little bit from your organizational culture?
That's a fantastic question because that's actually where I start with my people.
Mhm.
Because first, you have to have self reflection, period. You have to think about it. You have to come to the hard stuff. Now, the way you go about this can be different. I mean, some people are able to journal and write and reflect inwardly and actually understand how what they're doing affects everybody else. Great. Some people need to have an accountability partner, to which I say, that's fantastic. Just make sure they understand exactly what you're doing and that they're probably not one of your employees. Find someone who's actually going to tell you the truth kindly, but honestly. And the other thing is to actually have a coach, someone who's going to talk to you, someone who understands that you want to lead with empathy and reflect through, why did that meeting go the way it did? Why am I not getting out of my people what I want? Why is it that I don't have whatever tools I need to move along? Through through self-reflection, you build self-awareness. When you get to self-awareness, that's when you understand how you function within the world and the effect you have on the world and others, and the effect that they have on you. So self-reflection is first, which leads to self-awareness, which leads to self-empathy and understanding and connecting with the self. Because a lot of these leaders are gunners, right? I mean, they're very motivated. They're very skilled. They are driven people, like almost 2-in-1. But they're not always the best leaders. They're not always chosen for their leadership ability. And somewhere deep down, they need to reflect on this and understand that so that they can grow and get better. And that's where the self-empathy comes in, and understanding that, yes, I can do better with this. Yes, I do know what tools I need, or I know who to talk to get the tools I need. And once I can show empathy for myself, now I can start showing it for other people because I actually understand what it is.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I love that idea of just taking the time, for the reflection and how that leads to the awareness piece, because we can't do anything if we don't have the awareness. And I think always having that outside perspective of a coach, of a mentor, not everybody, but again, the people that you admire, the right people that you're seeking guidance for to
Right.
help you kind of hone it in and to build it, because it is a skill set. And like
Yes.
you said, it's a skill set that most of us weren't even introduced to until the mid 90s. So for many of us that have been in business for longer than that, it is a skill set that, and it's one that you can improve on. And I also think as a leader, giving yourself a little bit of grace and giving your own kindness to yourself. And that's something I work on with a lot of leaders. You probably do too, because we put so much pressure on ourselves. And I think part of our own emotional intelligence, our own awareness, is having empathy for ourselves, knowing we're going to mess up. So how would you suggest as a leader, if you do mess up, if you do, you know come out and you're more reactive than reflective or whatever, what is an empathetic way to approach it for yourself and for your team?
Well, the first is through self-reflection to understand where you fit. I mean, did you come out without showing empathy? Do you tend to be triggered by people? Do you tend to fly off the handle? And in connecting and understanding other people, is this the best strategy? I mean, I know in the past, I've been known to have a little bit of a temper. I mean, I'm not a redhead for nothing. And when you do that and you're looking at people and you just watch them wilt, as opposed to well, I was right and they needed that. It's, yeah, maybe I really could have handled that better. Maybe I could have pulled them aside. Maybe we could have actually had a conversation instead of me tripping off and
Mhm.
looking like a barbarian, because it doesn't do anybody any good. That doesn't serve you as a leader. That doesn't build your credibility. You get known as that person.
Mhm.
So by actually being able to reflect on that and understand what's happening and where you are in the world, the self-awareness, because until you reflect, you can't be aware of where you're at.
Yeah.
You just can't. None of us can. And it's that analogy with the pickle jar, right? When you're on the inside of the pickle jar, you can't see what the label says on the outside of the pickle jar. So that's why sometimes we need people who can help us see that.
Yeah.
And I want to point out that you make a fantastic point. That's not enough to have a coach. It's not enough to have an accountability partner. It has to be the right one. You know, I mean, you think of someone like Michael Jordan, right? He had coaches, but when he was playing for the Bulls, he didn't have the same coach he had in high school because he needed different skills. So don't just get a coach, get the right coach.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
And I love that you brought up this word trigger. And I think that's a great part of the reflection is to pay attention to that because, you know, like you, I could be a little fiery at times and those were triggers for me. So, you know, looking and seeing, you know, what was it that certain people were saying or doing, and then learning something such as, oh, interesting perspective. Tell me more about that rather than jumping in and not being afraid to not have all the answers to say, you know what, you make a good point. I need to think about that before I respond. You know, is it okay if I take some time? And even being honest, I want to make sure I'm thoughtful in how I respond to this. And I think, again, that is a really good thing. And I think people respect that. But you got to know your triggers. You got to know what sets you off, not only to communicate with others, but more importantly, that's that internal communication so that you can have the space you need to process.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, that's the nice part of actually doing journaling and writing and doing this kind of thing, because you may not see these patterns, but then someone can say, you know, that's the third time this week that you've had this happen in this circumstance. Is there something more going on there? And that honesty of, yeah, I don't know everything. I have no, you know, we're all doing the best we can with what we have at the time. And I'll be happy to get back to you with an intelligent answer once I have one.
Yeah. Exactly. Great point. So, you know, as we're coming to the close, I have a question. I would love to get your thoughts on this. I think we've touched on this and sort of weaved this throughout our conversation. But what would you say is the most important thing that leaders need to understand as to why empathy needs to be a non-negotiable in your toolbox?
Well, if we're talking strictly business and we're going into data and metrics, it's because there are studies that prove that it raises innovation, productivity, and profit. There was a study, well, it was more of a survey, but it was put out by Ernst & Young in 2022. And the whole purpose of this was to talk to people about the Great Resignation. And it ended up being about empathy. The big quote that comes out of this from Chris Payne, who's the vice chair of Americas from Ernst & Young, was empathy is not a nice to have. It is the glue and accelerant for the next era of business. Because what they found is that these empathic organizations actually could raise productivity by 87%, innovation by 86%, and profit by 81%. So there's a solid business case to be made for this. On the flip side, they did another study in 2023 or 2024 to follow up on that first one. And what they found were these companies that talked about empathy and, you know, used all the right words, but didn't actually walk the talk. Their productivity plummeted. 52% of employees wanted to look for a different job because they felt they couldn't trust their leadership because the words and actions did not align. The words, I have empathy, and the actions, I don't really care, didn't align. And so they wanted out. So using it poorly can actually do more harm than good, but doing it well affects all the hard metrics.
Wow. Amazing. Well, Melissa, this has been an awesome conversation. You know, the quotes you've used, the statistics you brought in, the tangible strategies we can use. These are the things that are going to make us stronger because leadership is hard. It's a simple concept, but it's not always easy in the day to day. And when we can truly bring this in, you know, I started off the conversation that this is one of the most powerful skill sets. And I think you have just amplified that. And I would love to have you tell us, because we know that you are doing some amazing things. Tell us all, what are you working on now? What is next for Melissa?
Well, I have a book coming out and it launches July 15th, and it's called The Empathic Leader: How EQ via Empathy Transforms Leadership for Better Profit, Productivity, and Innovation. So that's a big one. So, you know, anyone who's interested, I've gotten it out to lots of leaders and I've gotten some really good feedback. Right. So, you know, I'm always down for supporting, getting being on that. I also have my YouTube channel and my podcast, also called The Empathic Leader. So anybody who wants to hear more about it, you can find me there. And of course, you can catch me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and, you know, the usuals.
Fantastic. Well, it has just been a joy getting to know you and following you and learning from you. And I'm looking forward to staying connected. And, we're going to put all your information in the show notes. And I really do encourage people to go out and get your book because it's going to be fantastic. The final question I have today is sitting where you sit today through everything that you've learned, how do you define success for yourself today?
For me, success is an incremental thing. So, yeah, we all have long term goals and we all have things that we want to do. But today, if I can leave the world in a little better place than I found it today, then I'm successful.
Fantastic. Dr. Melissa, thank you again for being here. Thanks for impacting the world in a positive way. And I know that your journey to success and impacting even more lives is just getting started. So thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This was a fantastic conversation.
Well, this topic is just so near and dear to me. And I think it's because when I was a baby leader, man, I lacked empathy. And it's something that I've worked on over the past 15 years. And it has been a change for me. So I love talking about it and working with companies because it really is the change that we all need. And it's really going to amplify what you're doing. One of the biggest things that she talked about is the idea that judgment and empathy cannot coexist. And I think sometimes we think we're in empathy when we're really in judgment. So being able to take that off the table and just sit with, asking the deeper questions, listening, getting that frame of reference, because we can't have judgment in our teams, in our organizations. That's not what moves us forward. As a leader, taking time for the self reflection, because that leads to the awareness, and that's how we can do better. I love when she talked about being aware of your triggers. What are those hot buttons that get your blood boiling? Because oftentimes, if we're reacting in those moments of trigger, we can't be empathetic. And we're human. We're not always going to be in our empathetic quadrant. Sometimes we need to really have that reflection to get there. And that is why it is a skill set we all need to be working on. And then I love how she brought in the science behind it. It is statistically proven that when we are leading with empathy, our innovation and creativity grows, our productivity, production grows, and therefore our profitability does too. So if you haven't thought about it, if you haven't been convinced, hopefully after this conversation, you are. So let's make sure I would re-listen to this, I would retake notes, and I would be sharing this. If you're a leader, get this out to your department heads. If you're in a networking group, share this with other leaders that you're working with, and just even share this with your friends, because the truth is all of us can gain power by not only getting more clear, but learning how to be more empathetic. So thank you so much. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time. This has been another episode of Clarity in Action.